Welcome everyone and welcome to Cloud Native Data Management Day. In this session, we'll talk about beyond Kubernetes storage, Cloud Native Data Management. My name is Enrico Signoretti. I am an IT analyst for GigaOm, and this year we published two important reports around data storage, Kubernetes, and data protection also for Kubernetes. So we did a lot of research in different approaches from vendors, what the users ask from these vendors and what the challenges they are facing. The agenda for today is very simple and straightforward. So after a short introduction, we'll talk about the challenges, the solution, and we will also give a quick view of the market, let's say. The last 5 minutes are reserved for Q&A, so prepare to shoot some questions. So first of all, just to be clear, data protection is not data management, okay? Actually, if we look at the entire process, data protection is the first step. So the backup process in general, okay, is when you start collecting data, ingesting data for the data management. Then you need to do something with this data, okay? So yes, of course, you have a copy for protection reason, but actually you start digging into the data and collecting data and understanding what is happening, even trends in terms of how many data, how many volumes, how many data, what happened during the day, between backups at this date. So you catalog and index everything. You start doing your analysis and then take actions. All these actions and steps are made by the data management software. Okay, and then of course there are several additional steps that can be taken if necessary. Okay, so we can think about information lifecycle. You can think about compliance, search, data augmentation for other projects, starting in the security and whatever. So as I said, this is a very continuous process, and the first step of the process is the backup. There are different ways to see data management and different outcomes, of course. Usually, we at GigaOm propose this graphics where you can see that you can have an infrastructure-focused approach or a business-focused approach. In the first case, okay, everything is about the container, the volumes, the files. So you work primarily on metadata. On the second part, so the orange one, you see that we are talking about more the content of the data. And so you get a different outcome from this data that is more interesting to business, okay? We are talking about the discovery, for example, data governance, risk and security, and so on. While the first part is all about making operations easier. In fact, usually when you have the first of the two infrastructure-focused data management, you are focusing on TCO, mostly infrastructure TCO, while in the second case, it's all about processing and the value data, so creating more value from the data that you have. Let's start with talking about the challenges of Kubernetes. Okay, so the first challenge is the fact that Kubernetes is a complex tool, and there are several ways to deploy it. The first trend that is common practically everywhere is that you can decide if you want to have a single cluster with multiple applications that are deployed into it. Okay, and this is an approach that is very common in a small organization. For example, they don't want to have multiple clusters because they don't want to add complexity. Also, it's true that they don't have a lot of applications, and the IT drives all the infrastructure. So it's highly likely that you don't have many instances of Kubernetes because you want to have full control of the stack, and this stack is controlled by the IT department. Of course, it could be also that you like a complex life. I mean, you want to do too many things. You want to do a lot of tweaking. You want to make sure that your life is hard. But I don't think that this is the majority. On the other hand, you see that there are the possibility that many companies deploy multiple Kubernetes, and they serve with this multiple application. In some cases, you have quite the contrary of the first approach. I mean, multiple Kubernetes, each one of them with a single application. Why that? I mean, sometimes it's policy. Okay, so you have somebody that wants to keep it Kubernetes as part of the application somehow. I mean, it sounds absurd in certain environments, but actually this is what happens in some organization. It's also true that there is a multi-cloud approach. So you're forced to have multiple Kubernetes because they are deployed in different environments. Maybe they are deployed on Azure and AWS, for example, and then you have on premises, and then maybe for other reasons you have another application deployed on another cloud. Okay, Kubernetes is almost the same, but actually you need to manage all of them. And that there are data sovereignty, which is another problem. So if you are a multinational company, of course, you want to deploy the application locally because data has to be stored in the same country where you provide the service and things like that. And also, you lost control. I mean, Kubernetes sprawl is a thing. It's happening for several reasons. Sometimes it's just that there are different budgets to manage projects, so everybody has its own Kubernetes. Sometimes you have the developer that had an additional Kubernetes because they are deploying testing dev environments, and of course there are copies of data also there, but actually somebody has to manage it and so on. So it's a very complex scenario here. Another specific challenge of Kubernetes that comes from the previous slides is that scalability is multidimensional. Of course, there is the single cluster to manage, and for each cluster you have application and data. The number of instances you have of this application and data and clusters, maybe the formula is not perfect, but actually you can understand what I want to say here. So there is a dimension that is the number of clusters you have to manage. There is another dimension that is the number of application and data that you have. Okay, you can have multiple copies of application and data, and multiple instances because you have development test and maybe quality still and other copies that are around and so on. So there are multiple copies of everything, and it becomes crazy after a while. So additional challenges of Kubernetes, and that come, of course, to at a price. So there is a security and control issue that is coming around. Okay, so the sprawl of Kubernetes instances could be quite a problem, especially if you have developers that are making copies of their own applications, and they need to some of the data as well to test that everything's work correctly. Data governance. Again, there are several issues with this data management that is out of control at the moment, and this is because when we copy data, of course, we are copying also personal information. In many cases, we are copying databases with data that regards real people, and this could become easily a problem, especially if we don't have full control of where the copy goes, if the data remains in the same country and things like that. And then there are compliance issues. Okay, so how can you provide a full report of what is happening in the system? How are you sure, for example, that all the personal information that you are storing are compliant with GDPR, for example? So are you ready if somebody asks you what are all the instances of the data that regards to me in your systems? Okay, so right to be forgotten or things like that. This is becoming a huge issue for many many enterprises, especially enterprises that are in heavily regulated environments. And then there is the problem of making copies. Okay, when we make a copy of an application, it's now quite easy with many of the tools available in the market. The problem is that sometimes we need copies of the system that are not in the same servers, or maybe the database is big. I mean, big could be also hundreds of gigabyte or even a few dozens of gigabyte, because if you need to make a copy for a developer and you need to use it in a minimal Kubernetes installation for development reason, maybe on a laptop, having a full copy of the database, it's impractical, it's unusable, and probably you will use all the capacity of the laptop with just the first copy. So this is quite challenging for several reasons. So let's start to dig a little bit on what is next in the Kubernetes environment and how we can deal with all this complexity. First of all, we have to acknowledge that both data storage and data protection are providing data management features. So if this is not true today, okay, and of course, I'm not talking about CSI compatibility and you can provide snapshots here, but actually advanced data management capabilities, okay? But it's true that all the vendors are working to improve the data management side of things. And we will see more and more solutions working on data management, because this is the real differentiator, and this is what users are asking for. So what we should look today and tomorrow in to build a solid base for data management? First of all, application awareness. Okay, if your data protection solution is not ready to give you application awareness, and with this I mean hooks that, and with this I mean all the functionality that are necessary to understand which type of database you are using, how it is deployed, and how it is working, because you want to keep data consistent across copies that you are making. So this is the very first step that you need for all your data management. The second part is, of course, migration and data mobility. Okay, and this is table stake actually. So if you are the application awareness, and then you can do migration. So take a copy of your data and move it to another cloud, for example, or migrate data from one version of Kubernetes to the next one, or things like that. I mean, this is something that should be available. This is part of the promise of Kubernetes and about application and data portability. So this is at the base of every tool today. And now we are entering on the fact that, again, we talked about multidimensional scalability. So multi-cluster and multi-tenant data management is becoming crucial for everybody. Okay, you want to manage this on a larger scale. Okay, you want to have a global view of your infrastructure, no matter where it is physically deployed, I mean in the cloud, on premises. You want to keep a complete view of everything. This is the base, as I said, and this is these are all enablers for what comes next. And of course, analytics and reporting is another crucial aspect. Okay, you want to give information to the business. You want to keep an eye on what is happening. You want to have a complete view of the copies, who made the copies, why, when, and so on. So this is another part that is at the base of this strategy that you have to embrace if you want to do data management for Kubernetes. The next step is there are actually several next steps, but this is important to understand that nobody's there yet. Okay, there is some work. There are some vendors doing releasing the first features in this domain, but actually many of these features are still immature. So let's talk about copy data management. Okay, we want tools that are able to make copies of data, and of course keep track of these copies, update the copies if necessary, and help the developers to understand on which application with which data set are working and things like that. Okay, of course this is also important because we want the additional step on this is to make smart data copies. Okay, I don't want to make a full copy. Okay, I want to start from backup and retrieve only the amount of data that is necessary to make things work, to be sure that everything is in place to test my application. But I don't want a full database. Okay, so I don't want terabytes of data. I don't want terabytes of files. I don't want terabytes of records. I want just the minimum amount that is necessary to keep the application working, and of course provide a minimal service to test my things. The other important aspect is data tracking. As you can see, these are steps that are these are consequential steps. So one's follow the other. Data tracking is another important aspect. You want to track where your data goes. Why? How many copies has a single person, and is this a trustworthy person, and things like that. So you want to be sure that the data doesn't go in the wrong hands, and so this is important to for having a basic security check. And then you want a global data view. I already mentioned global in a previous slide. I mean, you want a global view of your infrastructure because you want to manage it globally, but actually more than having management, infrastructure management, it's data management is important. So you want to understand where your applications store the data, but also where the copies are going, if these copies need to be validated somehow, if before releasing a copy you want to check on something particular, and so on. So these are all important aspects of data management. And again, analytics and reporting. Of course, by adding all these new features, your analytics and reporting has to follow suite. So you can't think about not giving visibility to all your organization about what is happening with data. Okay, maybe there is a view that is important for the developers to see if it's working correctly. Maybe you want also to add chargeback for these developers, so you don't want to you want them making copies just for the sake of making copies. You want to be sure that they understand the cost of these copies, and but you want to keep control, and at the same time you want to give reports to the CDO, to the CISO, to all the persons that could be involved in this. Of course, there are also compliance and legal issues, so you want to be sure that all your data is under control, and it's easy to be found when necessary. So let's take a look at the market landscape. Okay, this is our latest GigaOm radar, was published the last week, And as you can see, there are several players that are already working on data protection. And of all these vendors, there are some of them that are really active in providing data management solutions. If we zoom in, you can see in this area that there are many companies in a way or the other approaching data management, and they have roadmaps, consistent roadmaps that are showing that in the future we'll be able to provide even more than what they are doing today regarding data management. So from my point of view, it's important to understand that cloud native data protection is totally different from what we have from traditional data protection and data management. Okay, but the fact that everything is application focused and no longer VM focused, for example. So it's no longer important to understand the container, which in the past was the virtual machine, but actually it's important to have an idea of the state of the application at the moment, yes, but also on how to reach that state, so the declarative part of the context. And of course, there is nothing like the container that can live by itself, but actually the container lives in a context. So also this information is important, and it's usually part of the Kubernetes environment. So we have to be sure to copy all this information, and some of this information need to be changed by when we move the application or when we want to make a partial copy of it, and so on. So these are all vendors, as I said, that are doing something around Kubernetes data management, and are providing the necessary tools that will lead to what I talked in this webinar. And with this, I think it's time to start answering your questions. So if you have any question for me, just use the tools that are available on the webinar tool.